All right, so what is the mother wound? I think it's really important for you to understand as a foundation where I learned this from, how I learned what it is, and what I actually mean when I'm talking about it in my work, because it can be a variety of different things, and it's actually a fairly new term. So the mother wound is a term coined by Bethany Webster, and she's an amazing practitioner, and I've learned a lot from her about the mother wound and how to heal and all of that. But there's I mean, she's talking specifically about where that came from, and I want you to understand the history of it, right? And so she explains how it was born of the patriarchy and how the patriarchy really developed this wound within us all, and the direct impact of the patriarchy in these ways. So the patriarchy really created a limiting world for women, right? The man's on top, and we gotta, submit to the man. And there's a sense of really being limited rather than being expansive around it. And the wounds that came of that are really a direct result of how women felt when they were limited in their choices. So I'll give you some examples so that you can understand what this actually looks like. So let's say you're a housewife in the 50s and you feel really limited in that you don't have a choice of whether you're a housewife or not. Like that's how you are. That's what you are. That's how it goes. And you don't really have an opportunity to do anything different. And you feel sort of suppressed. You feel there's a part of you not being supported and acknowledged and expressed in your life. And that is gonna show up in various ways. So then let's say you have kids, right? You're married, you have kids, your husband works. It's very typical 50s lifestyle. But and you are home taking care of the kids, sending them off to school, baking cakes, the picturesque it's comical, but like the picturesque 50s, housewife life. And as much as they portray it as something that's really awesome, like a lot of women felt really suppressed and limited in that role, and didn't like the powerlessness that they had. They couldn't really leave somebody. Like a lot of it's in the sense that if they weren't being treated well by their husbands, they couldn't leave. They didn't have the opportunities to do that. It's a very stuck sort of existence of hope you made the right choice in who you married kind of thing. So what ends up happening is they end up having children, and the mother is really frustrated. She's not seen, she's not heard, she's not fulfilling lots of different things in her life. She's not feeling empowered and like she can make choices for herself. She feels very much stuck in this world and in this realm and this role. And so she has children, and she unconsciously projects her pain and struggle and frustration onto them. And so when they are misbehaving, her capacity is limited because she's not feeling fulfilled. She's not feeling, seen and heard in her ways. And so she is in ways incapable of seeing and hearing her children and acknowledging their pain. So when she's not being acknowledged, right? And so it starts there and it perpetuates on down the line. Now, let's say that the children grow up. It's a different time, right? Women in the 50s having children, their children grew up in a very different time. And so when their children are growing up and they are starting to have careers, and their daughters going, starting to go to school and have build a career for herself, there's a sense of, I couldn't do that. And I don't want you to either because I couldn't. And this is a very subconscious, like a lot of women are not actually consciously doing this and being that sort of petty, but it's a subconscious, unconscious thing that happens. There's an energy about it where they don't actually want their children to grow up and be better and do better and surpass them. There's a sense of I don't want you to explore and experience things that I couldn't because I am not comfortable with my own limitations that I experienced, right? And so it's a perpetuation, and the child might not always, it depends on the kid and the relationship and how they handled this dynamic as a child and growing up as an adult, but some of them will then kind of self-sabotage. They don't want to surpass their mother and hurt her in that way too, right? And they feel in some ways that it was their fault that she was suffering because they were born, and if they weren't born, then she would have been happier. It's just all of this really, really fucked up dynamics and subconscious thought processes. Now, this is very real. Like, this is where a lot of this was born, and it's very real. However, there are also wounds that happen that are not of the patriarchy. There are mother wounds that happen that aren't born of the patriarchy, and we can get very similar wounds from our fathers. And so in my work, Bethany Webster coined the term the mother wound, and she's very good at working with specifically the mother wound born of the patriarchy. I see a lot more diversity here. I see a lot more different possibilities. And yeah, maybe ultimately they are rooted all the way back into the patriarchy from our grandparents, but a lot of times it's also just part of the wounds we get as people, right? And so as a child, as a person, you're going to have these wounds. They're going to come from your mom, your dad, your grandma, whatever. And they don't always have to be necessarily part of the patriarchy. It can also just be a general thing that happens in life. And so in the work that I'm doing, I'm talking about the mother wound in a more overarching way. And so I have shifted over to the term of the inner child wounding, because even though that incorporates a lot more than just the mother and the father wound, it incorporates a lot more. So it's not so specific. And you can get these wounds from other people. That's not just the mother. And so it's hard to just specify, this is the mother wound. My mother wound was very much from the patriarchy. It very much was from those sorts of choices. However, I also had a really, really deep father wound that actually is a lot more potent and powerful than the mother wound, and it has nothing to do with the patriarchy. So there's nuances. There's a lot of diversity, a lot of different experiences out there, a lot of different parents out there, types of parents. And so the mother wound is born of the patriarchy. However, it might not be, and you could be talking about an experience that would have happened regardless of the patriarchy. And also there's father wounds too. So in my work, I touch on all of them. We're going to look at all of them. The mother wound being of the patriarchy. We're not going to attack the patriarchy and say it's got to come down and, the matriarchy's got to come up, because that's just swinging the other way. And there's a reason the patriarchy took over. We need to find a balance. And really the mother energy helps us to find that balance and find a grounded middle ground between the masculine and the feminine. And the mother really does encompass them together in a very beautiful way. If it's not, swinging too far in one direction of masculine versus feminine, the matriarchy, patriarchy, whatever. It's a really beautiful process to uncover and understand when you're looking at your lineage and your ancestors and where you came from. But really, we can look at a lot more than just how the patriarchy has done it, because that really starts to villainize the patriarchy, and we don't want to wound the masculine any more than it already is. That's not my intention. And so I've kind of steered away from this idea and focusing specifically on the mother wound. We're looking at the inner child as a whole and how it was impacted by all of these things. The mother wound can be born from a neglectful mother, an abusive mother, an absent mother. There's different kinds of mothers that create these wounds in us that really just ultimately make us feel like we weren't worthy, we weren't enough, we weren't lovable, we weren't whatever. And these are the limiting core beliefs that come from these sorts of wounds, inner child wounds, that are limiting beliefs that really are limiting us in our daily lives today, here and now. And so the goal here is to understand, what is your mother wound? What are the wounds that came directly from your mother, that came from her mother, that came from her mother? What are the wounds that came from your mother, that came from her father? It doesn't really matter. All of it comes down to you. And your experience is what we're looking at here. And yes, there's a lot that's going to get healed along the line, and you can heal a lot of generations and a lot of stuff in your ancestry through this work. But what we're wanting to do is look at the core beliefs that came from your experiences, how you were treated by your mother, your father, your grandma, whoever, and shift those core beliefs, because that is what has the power here. It's not the mother wound that has the power. It's not the patriarchy that has the power. It's not the father wound that has the power. What has the power is the limiting core belief that you created around it. So if you know of any of the shadow work and stuff, and relational work that's out there these days, you know that like there's a story, there's an experience, there's something happens, and then what is the story? What do you make that story mean about you? So this is happening and I'm making it mean this. Well, it might not mean that. And so you might be creating a limiting belief here and a story that's very negative when that's not actually true. And so what we want to do is uncover those the truths and reprogram these limiting core beliefs to just be core beliefs that are grounded in truth, so that you can then thrive and you're no longer being, stuck hitting a wall over and over again, that like, this belief is making me stop. This belief is limiting me. This belief is keeping me from my potential, from the joy, from the love, from the success, from the money, from the friends, from the adventures, from the just fulfillment and the sense of thriving in my life. Okay, so I hope that explains what we're talking about here in terms of the mother wound, and then what I'm generally gonna more so include. Even if I'm saying the mother wound, I'm including all of that. Like, the mother wound to me is like the root. Like the root wound is that mother wound. Like everything else comes off of that. Everything else grows and branches from there, from the root wound, that mother wound, not necessarily the wound that comes from your mother. Right? It's the mother wound, the root wound, the core belief, the core story, the core wound, the core trauma. That's what I'm referring to often when I'm referring to the mother wound. So I hope that's helpful as I, move on and teach a lot about a variety of different things. That's what I'm referring to with the mother wound. And yeah, I'll explain more about what that might look like and how it might land for you and what it might actually look like for you in another video.